On July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl was walking her dog in the Cape Cod dunes in Provincetown, Massachusetts, when she came across a naked woman she thought was sunbathing. The woman was lying face down on a beach blanket, but when she got closer, she made a realization that made her blood run cold and she bolted. The police were called and they confirmed that the woman was deceased. The woman was missing her hands. Her nearly decapitated head was resting on a pair of folded jeans and a blue bandana. It was determined that she had likely been there for 2 weeks before the discovery of her body, which already gave law enforcement a disadvantage in identifying her. She would be called Lady of the Dunes and become Massachusetts' longest unidentified homicide victim. She was described as a redhead with an athletic build and medium height. Her hair had been pulled back into a ponytail, and her toes were painted with pink nail polish. The thing that had led to the biggest hope of someone recognizing her was that the Jane Doe had extensive dental work with multiple gold crowns, which was estimated to have cost upwards of $5,000 at the time. It was also estimated that she was in her 30s. At the time of her discovery, there was very little for police to go on. There were 2 sets of footprints that led to her body. Her cause of death was determined to be severe blunt force trauma to the skull, and her autopsy revealed that she'd been sexually assaulted, likely post-mortem. In addition to her hands being removed, she was also missing a forearm. Detectives canvassed nearby motels, rooming houses, and thousands of missing women reports, but nothing matched. They even had a clay model reconstruction of the woman. However, despite best efforts, there could be little uncovered about the woman, and the case would ultimately go cold for many decades. Over the years, there had been many theories locally about who this mystery woman was. One of these theories was that she had worked as an extra for the movie Jaws, which had been filmed earlier that year in Martha's Vineyard, but that had never been confirmed. Several other people had come forward throughout the years thinking that she was their missing sibling or someone they knew, but each time the identification was ruled out. More than once to re-examine her remains and look for new clues. Her skull was removed in order to create a new artistic rendering of what she might have looked like. In 2000, a DNA sample was collected and stored, and in 2022, the DNA was sent to Orthram Labs, world-renowned for using genetic genealogy to identify unknown individuals. On October 31, 2022, the Massachusetts State Police with the FBI announced that the Lady of the Dunes had been identified as Ruth Marie Terry after nearly 50 years after her body was discovered. She had been 37 years old at the time of her death. Ruth was born on September 8, 1936 in a small Manning town in Tennessee. By the time she was 20, she had left home and was married for the first time. By 1957, she was divorced and working in a car manufacturing plant in Michigan. She got pregnant and had a child, but she gave the child up for adoption to a family that worked at the plant. Then she left Michigan shortly after that. The child, Richard Hanchett, put his DNA into Ancestry.com in 2018 in the hopes of finding family related to his mother. He was able to connect with some family, but also discovered that his mother had been missing since the 1970s. This was the connection that was used to identify Ruth. Sometime in 1974, Ruth went to visit family in Tennessee with a new husband, Guy Rockwell Moldovan. After this visit, Ruth's family never heard from her again. Ruth's sister-in-law Carol Terry is quoted as saying, "I always had a bad feeling about that guy that she had married. They had only been married for 6 months before her body was discovered. When she had gone missing, Moldovan disappeared, never reporting his new bride missing." Ruth had been known to use several different variations of her name. Law enforcement say that she had connections to Tennessee, Michigan, and California, and they are looking for more information about her life before and up to 1974. Authorities announced shortly after Ruth was identified that they were also looking for any information about Guy Moldovan. He also used several names, was known to travel around the U.S., and was the lead suspect in the murder of his second wife and stepdaughter in 1960. In Seattle, Washington, it is strongly believed that he is responsible for Ruth's murder, the murders in Seattle, and an additional murder of an unknown victim. After he fled Washington, human remains were discovered in the septic tank of his home. He is also the lead suspect in 2 murders in June of 1950 in Humboldt, California. 28-year-old Henry Baird was murdered and 17-year-old Barbara Jo Kelly was dating Moldovan when she disappeared and her body was never discovered. Guy Rockwell Moldovan died at the age of 78 in 2002 in Salinas, California. Law enforcement are still working to positively identify Moldovan as the killer, though they are open to looking at other individuals. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. On November 10th, 1985, a group of hunters discovered two bodies in a metal drum at the Bear Brook State Park in Allentown, New Hampshire. Determined to be an adult female between the ages of 23 and 33, with dark curly hair and extensive dental work, and a little girl between the ages of 5 and 11 with a gap between her teeth and dark hair. The initial investigation followed every lead and ruled out several possible identities. In 2000, two more bodies were found in the same area in a similar metal drum. Authorities say that it was missed because it was likely outside the initial investigation search perimeter. The other two bodies were also discovered to be female, aged 2 and 4 with dark hair and an overbite, and a girl between the ages of 1 to 3 with light hair and a gap in her front teeth. The Allentown Police Department could not identify the victims. They would eventually be called the Bear Brook Murders or the Allenstown Four. In 2013 and 2015, different sets of composites of what the victims might have looked like were released in hopes of identifying them. In 2014, through DNA, they were able to determine that the woman and the oldest and the youngest child were related. The woman was the mother of the two children, and the fourth victim was not related to the others. In 2017, it was announced that all the bodies had been connected to serial killer Terry Petter Rasmussen. He was the biological father of the fourth unknown girl aged 2 to 4. Unfortunately, Rasmussen died in prison in 2010 of lung cancer and could not be asked about these murders. He had been serving a life sentence for the murder of Yoon Sun Jun. In 2019, authorities announced that they had identified the three related victims as Marilise Elizabeth Honeychurch, born in 1954, her daughters Marie Elizabeth Fawn, born in 1971, and Sarah Lynn McQuatters, born in 1977. They made the discovery with the help of a librarian, Rebecca Heath, who was researching the case and had come across posts on Ancestry.com looking for a long-lost half-sister named Sarah. The post dated back to as early as 1999. It wasn't until she got in touch with the family and asked if they were still looking for Sarah and if they had more information. That's when the family said that all they knew was that she was last seen with her mother, sister, and a man named Rasmussen. Rebecca Heath then contacted Peter Headley, a deputy for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, who worked with genealogists to help identify Rasmussen. With this new information, they could use DNA to positively identify the victims. Marilise had been married twice, having a child with each husband. Marilise and her daughters were last seen on Thanksgiving in 1978, when she fought with her mother over a man that she had brought with her, and his name was Terry Rasmussen. The only other assumed sighting of Marilise was 2 signed arrest reports for Robert Evans, a known alias of Rasmussen, signed by his wife Elizabeth Evans in February and June of 1980. There had been no mention of the kids in the police report, and they have not found any other relation to the unknown fourth victim other than she was the daughter of Terry Rasmussen. After identifying the 3 victims, officials ruled that Rasmussen had killed all 4. They are still looking for any information on identifying the last victim, Rasmussen's daughter, and there was a new composite made in 2019 of what she might have looked like. The child was likely born around 1975 or 1976, possibly in California, Texas, or Arizona. Rasmussen is being investigated for several other murders. In 1980, 14-year-old Lauren Rand and 25-year-old Denise Denall went missing. Their bodies were never found. Both victims lived within a mile of Rasmussen's home at the time. A surviving daughter of Rasmussen also told law enforcement that she remembered having 2 siblings, but that they had died, and it is believed that Rasmussen may have murdered those children as well. Or one of them may be the unidentified child. Law enforcement are still working to identifying her, and they've dubbed her the middle child and finding her maternal family. As well, they are looking to determine if Rasmussen had more victims in the areas he lived in, which include Colorado, California, Texas, Arizona, Idaho, Virginia, Ohio, Oregon, Hawaii, and New Hampshire. While in New Hampshire in 1980, a woman named Elizabeth Evans was listed as his spouse, but this woman has never been identified. Aliases he was known to have used include Robert Bob Evans, Curtis Mayo Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Larry Vanner, and Gary Mockerman. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. The Cook County Sheriff's Office has made an announcement in regards to the remaining unknown victims of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. In October 2021, one of the victims was identified with the help of the DNA Doe Project. This victim was known as Gacy Victim Number 5. For those who may not know, Gacy was a prolific serial killer who tortured and killed at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978 in Chicago. Gacy had a total of 8 unidentified victims, and in 2011 the Cook County Sheriff's Office reopened the case in the hopes of identifying them. They partnered with the DNA Doe Project, an organization that uses DNA and genetic genealogy to identify Jane and John Does. Since 2011, they have identified 3 unidentified victims: Timothy McCoy, James Hackinson, and William Bundy. Now they have identified a 4th victim as Francis Wayne Alexander, who went by Wayne. Wayne would have been 21 or 22 at the time of his death. Originally from North Carolina, he had moved to Chicago after getting married in New York in 1975. However, the marriage only lasted 3 months and they divorced shortly after. The family never reported Wayne missing, as they had originally thought he wanted space after his divorce. The last known sighting of him was a traffic ticket that was issued on January 5, 1976 in Chicago. His remains were found in the crawl space of Gacy's home in 1978, and authorities believe he was killed between 1976 and 1977, most likely shortly after that traffic ticket, as according to records, didn't make much income in 1976. Wayne is survived by his mother, 2 half-sisters, and 2 half-brothers. The family is also asking for their privacy at this time and does not wish to be identified. But additionally, they have said that they were saddened by the news but relieved to have answers and finally know what happened to him. Sheriff Dart, an investigator in this case, also said, quote, "This is the first time that we actually had a parent that was still alive in one of these cases." The Cook County Sheriff's Office is now looking towards identifying the remaining victims, known only as victim number 10, victim number 13, victim number 21, 27, and 28. All young males that would have gone missing from 1975 to 1977. Gacy was known to have abducted his victims from particular areas of Chicago, but he also lured some by promising them work or posing as a police officer, whatever it took to get them into his home. He was criminally active until his arrest in 1978. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. In September 2016, Elizabeth Wettlaufer went to a hospital in Toronto, Canada called the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. She was a 49-year-old nurse. She told the hospital staff that she was having problems with drugs. She had been struggling to find a job because of her addiction. Her last job found out that she was stealing medicine and using drugs while working. Wettlaufer had been working night shifts in places where older people live for about 10 years. She shocked her therapist when she confessed that she had killed and tried to kill many patients while working as a nurse. At first, her therapist didn't believe her or trust what she said. Wettlaufer wrote a 4-page confession detailing how and why she had murdered 8 and attempted to murder 6 more patients during her career as a nurse, and it was at that point that her therapist alerted law enforcement and also the governing body for nurses in Ontario. An initial investigation confirmed that Wettlaufer had faced multiple suspensions and terminations from various facilities for medication-related errors when it was discovered that she had given the incorrect medication to patients. Despite these errors that had resulted in terminations, it hadn't been enough to revoke her nursing license. She completed her rehab program and her therapist convinced her to go to the Toronto police and confess, which she did on October 5, 2016. She spent over 2 hours with a detective, walking him through her murder spree which began in 2007 after the divorce from her husband of 11 years. She described being filled with anger about her life, her job, her marriage. She expressed disappointment in never having children because her husband didn't want kids. She detailed that her ex-husband had been a quote-unquote bad guy and that had made her angry. Elizabeth Wettlaufer had grown up in a religious household. She was deeply involved in her Baptist church and had originally gotten a bachelor's degree in religious education counseling, but quickly discovered there wasn't a lot of money opportunities in that field and opted to go back to school to study nursing. When asked why she had killed, she had first acknowledged that she had an unchecked substance abuse issue and had been stealing medications from patients, but also said that she felt, quote, God or the devil or whatever wanted me to do it, and revealed that she never premeditated any of her attacks and she simply stated that she got a feeling and acted on it. Many of her victims had slighted her in some way. Sometimes they'd been rude to her or someone else. Sometimes they were just difficult to take care of, but something would happen that would trigger her feeling and she would grab insulin and directly inject the patient. Her victims ranged in ages from 68 to 96, and because they were elderly, none of the victims had autopsies and they were all listed as natural causes. Had she not confessed, her crimes would have never been caught. They were not mercy killings as some have reported. All of the victims could have gone on to live many more years. Wettlaufer herself did not say that they were mercy killings, but rather expressed that it was an anger or frustration or a belief that they were a bad person that led to the decision to take their lives. She revealed that she would get a euphoric feeling after successfully killing a patient. And her confession to her therapist hadn't been the first. She confessed to a childhood friend, her cousin, a neighbor, a lawyer, her pastor, and his wife, and an ex-girlfriend. During her confession to law enforcement, the detective asked why she thought no one had gone to the police about her confessions, and she said that she thought no one believed her, which she found frustrating. In total, Elizabeth Wettlaufer confessed to killing 8 patients with insulin and attempting to kill 6 more. She had confessed because she had realized during her sobriety and bipolar diagnosis that there had been no higher power that was guiding her, but that she was hurting people and wanted to be stopped because she could not be stopped on her own. After her confession, she was released on the promise that she would not leave town while Toronto police worked to gather evidence to confirm her story. On October 25, 2016, she was arrested. Wettlaufer waived her right to a preliminary hearing and admitted to her crimes to a judge on June 2017. She was sentenced to 8 concurrent life terms in prison and will not be eligible for parole until 2042. A public inquiry was started in 2017 by the Attorney General of Ontario to put measures in place to stop this from happening again. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Now, this case is incredibly disturbing, and not just because of the heinous acts carried out by this sick individual, but that multiple medical institutions that never reported their suspicions to the authorities. Their inaction led to countless more deaths, which makes this even more shocking how he got away with this for 16 years. It was in September 2002 when Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey, brought on 42-year-old Charles Cullen. Cullen was a veteran nurse who had been working for many hospitals over an almost 20-year career. No one really questioned why he'd moved from so many hospitals. Cullen was divorced with 2 children and blamed the moves on his ex-wife and him wanting to be closer to his kids, which all seemed like a reasonable excuse. When the hospital checked in with many of his previous employers, they all gave neutral or positive feedback. Cullen worked in the critical care unit and by all accounts seemed like an attentive, hardworking nurse who worked well with his coworkers. However, when he started working there, the hospital started noticing more patient deaths than was normal, and many of them had been stable when they all of a sudden had very sudden declines in health. An internal audit of several patient deaths led to the involvement of the New Jersey State Police. Toxicology reports determined that multiple patients had medications in their systems that hadn't been prescribed to them, such as insulin, a heart medication called digoxin, and epinephrine. Somerset ultimately fired Cullen on October 31, 2003 for a small HR issue. They claimed he had lied on his application. After he was fired, the mysterious deaths stopped, and the hospital seemed to drop the internal investigation. However, the NJSP still pursued the wrongful deaths. A coworker who had worked closely with Cullen for almost a year, Amy Lauren, agreed to work with law enforcement to better understand what was going on. Hospital records showed that Cullen was accessing the same medications that had been found in the victims' toxicology reports. Amy recounted seeing Cullen administer medications to patients that weren't assigned to him, and although it had seemed odd, she had never thought anything sinister about the interaction. Cullen's history with other hospitals also started to come to light. He had been abruptly terminated by nearly every hospital he worked at, but law enforcement had a hard time determining why. Many of the hospitals weren't forthcoming about Cullen's time as an employee. Cullen went to nursing school in 1986 after a short career in the U.S. Navy led to a medical discharge. He worked at the St. Barnabas Medical Center from 87 to 92. He had resigned abruptly when an internal investigation showed that contaminated 4 bags had led to dozens of patient deaths. The hospital at the time strongly believed Cullen to be connected to the contaminations, but claimed they didn't have definitive proof. He then moved on to Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, where he worked for a year. Their 3 elderly patients were discovered to have digoxin in their systems, and the final victim had told a family member that a sneaky male nurse had injected her with medication. But the claim had been dismissed and she had died shortly after, under mysterious circumstances. He then moved on to 7 more institutions, each lasting about a year or 2 before he moved on to the next one. As the police pieced together a framework on his employment history and tied it with a string of mysterious deaths, they were able to collect enough evidence to begin surveillance. Many of his victims were already in critical condition, elderly, or in poor health. Because of this, a lot of the deaths could be explained away as either coincidence or accident. But there were at least 2 hospitals that had directly linked Cullen to medications that had caused a patient death. In 1998, he was fired from a rehab center for administering medications to patients that hadn't been prescribed that had caused a death. A group of nurses that worked on the same floor as Cullen's at St. Luke's had attempted to get him charged in 2002, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. Law enforcement used his friendship with Amy Lauren to get enough evidence to arrest. Wearing a wire, Amy attempted to get him to confess, but he didn't admit enough for a full arrest. They did arrest him before they had enough evidence, and he later confessed to killing 2 patients at Somerset, which was enough to charge him. Cullen later agreed to confess to as many murders as possible in order to avoid the death penalty. He had stated he had been too many to count, and he claimed to have murdered around 40 but couldn't remember names. Law enforcement was able to identify 29 victims, but stated that there could be hundreds of victims that were never identified. Not all the hospitals had accurate records. Some had destroyed records during Cullen's employment, and the deaths that weren't suspicious were never flagged. Cullen never said why he did what he did. At some point during his confessions, he stated he was helping patients, but at other points he admitted to watching patients suffer for days because of what he did. He seemed to act impulsively, either directly or indirectly. Sometimes he used contaminated 4 bags, sometimes he injected the patients himself. There were additional methods that weren't revealed to the media. He pleaded guilty on March 2, 2006. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences. In the wake of his conviction, many of the hospitals were sued by victims' relatives, which resulted in several settlements that remain sealed. In 2005, New Jersey enacted new legislation called the Enhancement Act, which gave stiffer requirements for hospitals to report suspicious deaths and keep employee records pertaining to complaints and disciplinary relating to patient care for at least 7 years. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Chester Hospital in Chester, England began experiencing a sharp increase in infant mortalities in their neonatal intensive care unit. Initially, they could not figure out what was going on, but it became so bad that in 2016, they stopped taking in premature infants and transferred them to nearby hospitals. A report found that the hospital had a death rate that was 10% higher than normal. Was that there wasn't a single cause or factor that was causing these deaths. In 2017, law enforcement was brought in when multiple reviews and audits were unable to determine what was going on. Through hospital records, there was only one common denominator between 15 unexplained infant deaths and 17 life-threatening incidents between June 2015 to June 2016. There was one single employee present for each of the incidents that had been determined to be suspicious. 32-year-old nurse Lucy Leppi. Leppi had worked for the hospitals in 2011 and had been removed from the neonatal ward in 2016, moved to clerical duties while the hospital worked towards solving the strange incidents. When Leppi was removed from the ward, the unexplained deaths that had plagued the neonatal ward had all but stopped. For a year, the hospital and law enforcement worked to gather as much information about the deaths, which were eventually determined to be murder and attempted murder, and eventually concluded that only one person had been there for every incident, Lucy Leppi. Through autopsies, they found some infants had been given insulin in lethal amounts. An audit done by the hospital concluded that access to insulin was supposed to remain locked by the lead nurse. However, it was discovered that the keys were often given to anyone who needed access when the lead nurse was busy. Leppi also had been caught having more mistakes than normal for a nurse with her experience. She was discovered to have not noticed there was air in an injection. Some parents had even connected the dots that it was the hospital when many of them compared stories about their infants going into sudden distress around the same time. Though they had never assumed it was a person causing it, they had thought it was a virus going around, and many asked to be transferred to another hospital. Leppi was arrested on July 3, 2018 and charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder. Following her arrest, her home was searched and they found this note which seems to admit guilt. "I don't deserve to live. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. I am evil, I did this." There were more notes, and detectives stated that these were on post-it notes, filled like this all over her home. Some of the notes expressed frustration that she'd been removed from neonatal service and wasn't allowed access to the ward anymore. During the trial, it was also revealed that 2 employees came to the hospital before the internal investigation with concerns about Leppi's care. However, at the time, they were dismissed and told not to make a fuss. One of these employees was a pediatrician who had been monitoring her when he noticed these things happening only when she was on shift. The trial has protected the families involved. There is a publication ban so that none of the families or the children's identities will be revealed during trial. There are still many more months of trial left, and there likely won't be a verdict until spring 2023. Leppi has been held in police custody since her arrest. If convicted, she will spend the rest of her life behind bars. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. 47-year-old Jonathan Howard Harez has worked in nursing for over 20 years, with 15 of those at Atrium Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He had been nominated for a Nurse of Distinction Award by the North Carolina Nurses Associate for outstanding work. His wife, who also works as a doctor at Atrium, had been the one to nominate him. However, it has recently come to light that Jonathan Harez has a dark secret. He was arrested on October 25th. Suspicion began on December 1st, 2021, when 62-year-old Pamela Little came to the hospital. For reasons unbeknownst to the hospital, her health began to rapidly decline. They were able to stabilize the patient and during an investigation, determined that the patient had been given a near-lethal dose of insulin. It was at this time that Atrium began an internal investigation to find out how it had happened under their care. During the investigation, there were 2 more deaths that initially hadn't seemed related, but they were able to determine that 2 women had been administered lethal doses of insulin. The first victim was 61-year-old Gwen Crawford, who died on January 5, 2022. The second was 62-year-old Vicky Lingerfeld, who died on January 22, 2022, and can easily go undetected. At this time, it is unclear what alerted the hospital to look for elevated insulin as the cause of death, but will likely be revealed in future court proceedings. By March 2022, the internal investigation by the hospital had led to the belief that Harez had been responsible for the insulin overdoses, and Atrium alerted law enforcement with their suspicions and removed Hayes from patient care, and soon after he was fired. The chief medical examiner came in and stated there was probable cause to charge Jonathan Hayes, and a search warrant of his home was conducted. At this time, we do not know what was found at the home, as the information has been sealed from the public until his trial. Forsyth County District Attorney Jim O'Neill said in a statement to the media addressing the arrest that they are still working to determine if there are more victims, but stated that they believe Hayes acted alone. No motives have been revealed, and Hayes has denied any wrongdoing. Hayes is being held without bail while he waits for their court proceedings. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Emma Courtney was born on May 11, 2022. Anna Mo Mariah Wilson, a 25-year-old professional cyclist, was found dead in a friend's house in Austin, Texas. Wilson was in Austin for a cycling race. Earlier that evening, she had dinner with another cyclist who was also a past romantic partner. They were not currently in a relationship but had recently ended things on good terms. After dinner, Wilson was dropped off at her friend's house. Around 10 p.m., a black Jeep Grand Cherokee was captured on video arriving at the house briefly before leaving. Shortly after, Wilson was discovered with gunshot wounds and was pronounced dead at the scene. The murder investigation quickly connected the shooting to Wilson's ex-boyfriend's current girlfriend, Caitlin Armstrong. She also owned 2 firearms, and one of the match-to-shell casings found the murder scene. Through Wilson's cell phone records, investigators were able to piece together a motive. Armstrong had likely discovered that her boyfriend had been seeing Wilson and had murdered her in a jealous rage. The boyfriend initially denied any romantic connection to Wilson, but after seeing cell phone records, eventually admitted that he had been seeing the 2 women romantically, and they apparently didn't know. However, it appeared that Armstrong figured out her boyfriend's double life. Armstrong was brought in for questioning the next day and was asked why her vehicle was seen on surveillance outside a murder victim's home, and she offered no explanation. Soon into the interview, Armstrong lawyered up. Law enforcement had wanted to arrest Armstrong that day on suspicion of murder. However, there had been an issue with some paperwork and they were forced to release her. 6 days later, on May 17th, they had an arrest warrant. However, when they showed up at her home, Caitlin Armstrong wasn't there. They discovered that the 31-year-old yoga instructor had been busy starting from the moment of her release. Armstrong had ID allegedly belonging to her sister. She had sold her vehicle for $12,000 cash and had used that cash to elaborately travel from Texas to Costa Rica in order to make it more confusing. For 43 days, Armstrong had been moving around Costa Rica. In that time, she had plastic surgery to alter her appearance, she cut and colored her hair, and was jumping from hostel to hostel, teaching yoga where she could earn cash using a variety of aliases. U.S. Marshals apprehended Armstrong at a hostel in Santa Teresa on June 29, 2022. When arrested, she had denied that she was Caitlin Armstrong and was held in Costa Rica until her identity could be confirmed by fingerprint. From there, she was arraigned and deported back to Texas, where she remains in custody for the murder of Anna Wilson. She has pleaded not guilty and is currently being held on a $3.5 million bond. Her trial is scheduled for June 22, 2023. Let me know if you want any updates on this trial. There may be additional charges and arrests made if law enforcement can prove that Caitlin Armstrong was assisted in fleeing the country. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Wanted fugitive Gwishon Burton was on the run for nearly a year before he was tracked down after being spotted by a federal agent, Jeff Andre, on vacation at Disney World. Andre was also on vacation and, in a strange cosmic coincidence, had spotted Burton while at the Animal Kingdom theme park. The 32-year-old Brooklyn, New York native had been charged with fraud after stealing the identities of 4 people and applying for several COVID-19 relief loans. The fraud scheme had allowed him to collect over $150,000. He had been charged in November 2021 in a crackdown that discovered dozens of fraudulent schemes to collect on pandemic relief that had been created to help small businesses. When law enforcement went to arrest him back in 2021, they discovered he had fled his home and had been on the run ever since. Burton had a distinctive H tattoo on his neck, and it was this tattoo that caught the eye of Jeff Andre. Andre, with the help of Disney security, arrested Burton. Burton gave them a fake identity and forged ID at the time of his arrest. He was later brought into custody and fingerprinted, which confirmed his identity. He is being held without bail as he is deemed a flight risk and is waiting for extradition back to New York. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Louis Edward Flood was discovered living in British Columbia, Canada after 20 years on the run for criminal sex offenses with minors. Flood, now 77, disappeared from Idaho when he was released on parole in 2001 after serving 3 of his 18-year sentence. Flood had been featured on the television show America's Most Wanted in 2011 in hopes the public would be able to help get him back into custody. It was in July of 22 that a tip came into the Canadian RCMP in Creston, BC that had reported Flood in the area. The RCMP contacted the U.S. Marshals Service, Idaho State Corrections, and the Idaho State Police, and a coordinated effort was made to arrest Flood. He was arrested on July 21st and extradited back to the U.S. on July 25th, where he will serve the remainder of his 13-year sentence. No word yet on if he committed any further attacks while on the run, or how he remained undetected in Canada for so long. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. 40-year-old Usman Qasim was wanted in Canada and recently apprehended by UK authorities. Qasim had been on Canada's 25 most wanted lists for a variety of assault charges, criminal harassment, and failure to comply and attempted murder. In January 2020, Qasim was identified as a suspect in an assault investigation. In April 2020, Qasim allegedly had fired several shots at a couple sitting in a vehicle in a seemingly random attack. Then in October 2021, police were alerted to an attack in a parking structure where a woman was attacked by a man with a firearm. Surveillance connected the attack to Qasim. He was then placed on Canada's Most Wanted in 2022 and was recently discovered to be living in the United Kingdom. There had been a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest, and at this time, it is unclear if the reward had motivated someone to provide Qasim's whereabouts. He was arrested on November 7, 2022 by UK authorities and is currently being held while he waits to be deported back to Toronto. Number 5. Octavio Juarez Coro. On September 8, 2021, the FBI made an announcement. A Milwaukee fugitive wanted for murder would be added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. 47-year-old Octavio Juarez Coro. He was wanted for an incident that happened on Memorial Day on May 29, 2006. Hundreds of people were gathered in the South Shore Park in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, all celebrating the American holiday with barbecues and picnics. One family was enjoying themselves when someone noticed trouble approaching them. Octavio Juarez Coro was walking up to the family. He wanted to speak to his estranged wife. It was her family who he had dropped in on uninvited. A friend intervened and tried to get Octavio to leave without causing a scene, but was unsuccessful. Octavio and his soon-to-be ex-wife were in the final stages of their divorce, but couldn't agree on a custody arrangement of their 3-year-old daughter. It was this issue that had brought him to the park that day. Octavio refused to leave the family affair, becoming increasingly agitated, and then suddenly produced a handgun. He ordered his ex-wife, her boyfriend, and 3 other members of her family to get on their knees. In front of his daughter, he began firing, wounding 3 and killing 2. His wife survived 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, but her boyfriend had been one of the victims killed along with a family friend. Octavio then fled on foot, and he remained at large for over a decade. For 16 years he was on the run, and he was recently captured. It had been thought that Juarez Coro had fled to Mexico, and those suspicions were confirmed when he was spotted in Zapopan, Guadalajara, Mexico. It was a tip from the public that allowed the FBI to capture him. Special Agent Michael Hansel said in a statement, Juarez Coro spent the last 16 years running from law enforcement, hiding in another country, and believing time and distance was on his side. The FBI has a long reach and extraordinary law enforcement partnerships across the globe. I commend the tireless efforts of all our partners from Milwaukee to Mexico in closely coordinating with the FBI in capturing this wanted fugitive and helping to bring this violent offender to justice, as well as closure to the victims and their families. This is another instance of proving that discussing these cases and keeping them in the public eye is an excellent tool for getting these cases solved. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Daisy Handcorn-Smith was born on April 5, 1972. Nancy Anderson, who was 19 years old, was at her apartment in Waikiki, Hawaii. Two salesmen selling silverware were demonstrating their products to her when her 18-year-old roommate, Jody Spooner, came home around 2:30 p.m. After the demonstration, Jody went to her room for a nap. She woke up around 5 p.m. and went to the kitchen. There, she noticed water running in Nancy's bathroom, which seemed strange because Nancy should have been at work by then. Jody found Nancy's bedroom door slightly open and discovered Nancy lying on the floor, covered in blood. Jody immediately went to a neighbor's apartment and asked them to call 911, believing Nancy had killed herself. Nancy had moved to Waikiki in October 1971 to take some time off before starting college. She was a 1970 John Glenn High School graduate in Bay City, Michigan. She had just returned from a trip home to visit family for Christmas and New Year. Nancy worked at a McDonald's and was known to be very friendly to anyone she met. When police arrived, they discovered that Nancy had multiple stab wounds on her neck, chest, stomach, back and sides. She also had what looked like defensive wounds, which for police eliminated the chance that they were self-inflicted. Police collected evidence, including several bloody towels and multiple sets of fingerprints. Police interviewed Jody, who said that she'd heard something odd around 4:15 p.m., but hadn't thought much about it because there weren't any further disturbances after that. She also believed that all the doors had been locked, including Jody's bedroom. Police talked to several people in the surrounding area, but no one had heard or seen anything suspicious. Neighbors and acquaintances of Nancy said that she'd been known to be very friendly and often had men come over or to go out on several dates since moving to Hawaii. Police had found evidence that Nancy had opened a bank account at the Bank of Hawaii that day. When they talked to the teller who had assisted her, they said that she'd arrived sometime around 2:15 to 3 p.m., but believed it to be closer to 3 p.m. After the police walked back to the apartment, they put Nancy's time of death between 3:10 p.m. and 5:15 p.m. At first, the two salesmen were suspects. They were identified as Parker Graham and Jeffrey Alward, and they volunteered fingerprints and took polygraphs, eliminating them as suspects. Other friends, ex-boyfriends, and co-workers in both Nancy and Jody's life were interviewed, most giving fingerprints and taking polygraphs, eliminating them as suspects as well. During the autopsy, it was discovered that Nancy had been stabbed 60 times with a total of 63 wounds, 3 being exit wounds. The murder weapon was believed to be a knife, 10 millimeters wide and 6 millimeters long. After months of no leads, Nancy's case went cold. In 2001, a DNA profile was made of the blood samples found in 1972. 3 different DNA profiles were found, 2 male and 1 female. Between 2001 and 2004, all past suspects' DNA was tested and were all eliminated as possibilities again. Law enforcement in Honolulu also used DNA that they sent to Parbon Nanolabs, which specializes in DNA phenotyping, which is a type of DNA that is used to test DNA. Processing of predicting physical appearances and ancestry from unidentified DNA evidence. They were able to produce a projected sketch of the suspect. In December of 2021, Hawaii cold case detectives got their first break in the case in almost 50 years. An anonymous tip came in that Tudor Chirilla should be a suspect in the case, and had previously run for the Nevada Supreme Court. In 1972, Chirilla had lived less than 3 miles from Nancy Anderson. At the time, he was working as a graduate assistant attorney. In 1995, Chirilla was charged with kidnapping and assaulting a woman that he was in a relationship with. She alleged that he had severely beaten her, trying to render her unconscious to sexually assault her. She managed to escape and press charges, but the case was never convicted. The Hawaii Police Department in February 2022 requested the help of the Reno police in getting a sample of Chirilla's DNA, but they were unsuccessful in getting the DNA covertly. So in March of 2022, they tried something different and they enlisted Sharila's son and got DNA from him. The following month in April, he provided the sample and his identity was confirmed. A warrant was issued on September 1st to collect DNA from Sharila himself. On September 6th, they finally got the sample. 2 days after law enforcement collected the sample, Tutor Sharila attempted suicide. However, he was found in time and sent to the hospital where he made a full recovery. On September 12th, it was confirmed that the DNA found at the scene was Sharila's. He was arrested and held in Reno, Nevada without bail. Hawaii authorities are working on extraditing him, and that hearing is set for early December. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. It was in early March 2019 when NYPD detectives got a phone call from an anonymous tipster. The now adult said that when she was 11 years old, she saw her mother and stepfather burying black garbage bags in their backyard in 1976. The tipster believed that the garbage bags contained the body of a person and gave the exact location. On March 12, 2019, investigators began searching the property and human remains were discovered under a concrete slab in the backyard of a home on 1115th Street in Richmond Hill, Queens, New York. It was determined the body had been dismembered at the neck, shoulders, and hips. Over the next few years, NYPD and the FBI worked to identify the man. Eventually, they would use DNA from the remains to attempt to identify him. In 2021, they were able to finally identify him, and in doing so were one step closer to solving his murder. The man was identified as 81-year-old World War I vet George Clarence Seitz, who on December 10, 1976 had left his home in Jamaica, Queens to go get a haircut and was never heard from again. Once George Seitz was identified, police did extensive interviews and scoured records trying to find as much evidence as they could to point to a suspect. And they found a suspect, and it was the owner of a barbershop that Seitz frequented. 74-year-old Martin Mata was identified and confessed. He was later charged with second-degree murder. Mata had stated that he had killed Seitz and robbed him for the $7,000 to $8,000 he had on him. Seitz was known to distrust banks for more times, and he was known to carry large sums of money on him at all times. Mata claimed that he stabbed Seitz in the head, dismembered his body, and buried it in the backyard. He was arrested without incident. In October 2022, he pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter after taking a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Melinda Katz, district attorney for Queens, said in a press conference, quote, "After 46 years, a veteran of First World War gets justice. The successes of modern technology and forensics made it possible for us to not only identify the remains of the victim, but also to find any witnesses. When I became district attorney, I created the cold case unit for cases such as this, where time seems to be the enemy. Time allowed forensic genetic genealogy and our investigators to catch up to this defendant. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue." On March 24, 1994, a friend and neighbor came to deliver mail to her senior neighbor, Clare Holman in Barrijo Springs, San Diego, California. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer, which was odd. She peeked into one of the front windows and saw that the home inside was ransacked. Miss Holman was found deceased in her home. The 72-year-old widow and former hairdresser had owned a shop in town for many years, but was now retired. There were no signs of forced entry in her home, so investigators believed that she either knew her attacker or they were familiar with her routine. An autopsy showed that she had been strangled with a rope or cord, and her death was ruled a homicide. After months of investigation and no leads, her case went cold. In 2003, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department got a DNA profile from the evidence that was discovered at the scene. They entered the results into CODIS, the federal database of DNA for unsolved crimes, but they didn't get any matches from that. In March of 2021, they would try again, but this time with genetic genealogy in the hopes of finding a suspect. The evidence from the crime scene was re-examined and they found a single hair with foreign male DNA. With that, they were able to find 118 distant relatives of the suspect. For several months, they combed through and narrowed down all of the relatives until they honed in on a single suspect. In September 2022, it was announced that a suspect had been identified: Jerry Dwayne Robinson. Robinson had been a plumber in the area and may have worked for Clare Holman on occasion. Robinson died 15 years ago in 2007 from cancer. A paternity test was used to confirm the DNA from the suspect matched Robinson's. At the time of the killing, he was 51 years old. It is also believed the motive was robbery and sexual assault. Both the Holman and Robinson families have been informed, and the San Diego County Sheriff's Department considers the case closed. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. It was the day after Christmas in 1980 when 25-year-old Sandra DeFis was found in her Las Vegas home, brutally beaten to death and sexually assaulted around 9:30 p.m. She was found in her bed under the covers. She lived at the house with a roommate and her 3-year-old daughter. Fortunately, the daughter was not at home at the time. She had been staying with her grandparents. Investigators collected a vast quantity of evidence, including foreign dark hairs, a glass with a fingerprint, and a sexual assault kit. The young mother was recently divorced and worked as a waitress to support herself and her daughter. Her ex-husband was initially the lead suspect, but was quickly cleared. Days of the investigation turned to months, which turned to years, and Sandra's case went cold. In December of 2021, the Las Vegas Cold Case Unit got a call from Sandra's daughter, now in her 40s, asking for any updates on her mother's case. This made cold case detectives re-examine the case with fresh eyes. They found fingernail scrapings under a Sandra's sexual assault kit that could now be tested with new DNA technology available. They found male DNA in the sample. The sample pointed to a suspect, 64-year-old Paul Nuttall. Nuttall had been detained for questioning in the original investigation but had been released. Police went and spoke with Nuttall, showing him a picture of Sandra and asking if he remembered her. About her murder, he responded by saying he didn't know what they were talking about, and at that time they also got a DNA sample from Nuttall. He had been the initial suspect as his fingerprints had been found on the glass received from Sandra's house. Sandra's roommate was a friend of Nuttall at the time, and she explained that she had given Nuttall the drink when he had asked for a place to stay for the night as he had nowhere else to go, but she had told him no because Sandra was sleeping and she didn't know him well. The roommate claimed that she escorted him out of the house before leaving as well. The roommate is now deceased. Nuttall would have been 21 years old at the time. The DNA was a confirmed match for Nuttall and he was arrested. He is being held without bail and is currently waiting for his next court appearance. They believe sexual assault and robbery was the motive. Homicide Lieutenant Jason Johnson said in a statement to the media, quote, "After he was taken into custody, my cold case investigators had the pleasure of making the one phone call that every cold case detective wants to make. They were able to inform DeFis's daughter the man suspected of murdering her mother was in custody. There is a concern that Nuttall has dementia and will be undergoing evaluations before the trial. LVMPD is looking to see if there are any more victims linked to Nuttall, who has resided in Las Vegas his whole life. After 4 decades, Sandra DeFis will finally get justice. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.